Hi, so before we get started, I'd just like to ask you, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to the channel, and also at the end of the video, please consider give it a thumbs up if you found it useful. Also, leave a comment below on ways to and suggestions and ways to improve this video moving forward. Let's go. Hi, in this video we are going to cover the tag in JUnit 5, and tag concept in JUnit 5 is pretty much the same concept as categories in JUnit 4, which we covered on a previous lesson. So what I have here is the same JUnit 4 category example that we used in the previous lesson, and what I'm going to show you here is how to convert these JUnit 4 test suites using categories to the JUnit 5 equivalent mechanism using the tag annotation. So just very quickly here to review, we have a performance test class. We've got a regression tests class. We've got a feature 1 tests, the bunch of tests here, and feature 2 tests. Okay, so these are the 4 test suites that we've got. And also recall from the previous lesson that I've defined a my test suite here, which included all of these 4 test classes, as you can see here. Okay, and then there was a my super suite test, which I used to demo a suite that includes a suite, which I called my super suite. And then I also recall that then after these 2 suites were defined, my test suite and my super suite, then we start using categories to filter out test classes. So let's start by converting all of these test classes and suites and categories using tag annotation. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to see how we can convert or implement this my test suite. So recall that in JUnit 5 there is no concept of suites anymore. This has been discontinued. So now the only extension model, as mentioned on the previous lesson, is with the extend with. If you want to use the JUnit 4 test suites, there is a way to use them using the Run with JUnit platform. But the issue is that this is technically not really a JUnit 5 test anymore, so I don't want to cover that in this video. What I want to show you is how just to use tags we can achieve the same functionality. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is let's convert all of these categories with tags. So basically what you need to do is you just need to replace category with the word tag, okay, which is how it's defined in the Jupyter API, and then we define the name of the tag with just strings. Okay, so we're gonna have this tag. Let's copy this. So we're gonna have a flaky tests tag here. Okay, and we're gonna have a feature tests tag. Okay, so we have flaky tests tag and feature tests tag, which corresponds to the categories tag that we had before. This is that for, let me expand this because there is something wrong here. And let's fix this. Let's also make all of the access package private. Okay, so as a way to clean up the class. Alright, so that's that for this class. Now let's go to feature 2 tests and do exactly the same thing. So let's replace the category with the tag, and this tag is going to be called feature tests. Okay, so that's one. Let's just remove this and import this. Good. And let's fix again the package access. Let's make everything package private as per the JUnit 5 mechanism. And recall that this class here, let me make this thing slightly bigger, that here we have 2 tags in this example. We had a tag applied to the class level, and we also had a tag applied at the test method level, which we called flaky tests. So remember that the tag annotation is pretty much the same, has the same concept and applicability as the category. So you can apply it at the class level, like here, or you can also apply it at the test method level, like here. So this class has been converted to JUnit 5 as well as this. So let's keep going. So we had the regression tests class here. Let's just clean this import and convert this to the Jupyter API. And again, let's make everything package private. And let's also create a tag here for the regression tests. Okay, so now let's do the same thing for the performance tests. Let's create a, let's first fix this class. So let's import here and let's make this package private, and so all of them. And let's also create a tag here called performance tests. So now we have regression tests, performance tests, and all of the, basically all of the test classes have been converted to the Jupyter API and are using the tag annotation as opposed to the categories. Okay, so now let's work with the suites and the categories for filtering. So as I mentioned, suites are not natively supported in JUnit 5 any longer. So, you know, we can't do this declaratively in JUnit 5 any longer. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to basically have to specify this suite in Gradle. You know, Gradle build, which is the example I'm using. If you're using Maven, is pretty much the same, very similar mechanism. So let's see how we can define this test suite in Gradle. So let me get my Gradle build and let's see how we can fix this. First, let's clean up this a little bit here. Okay, so one thing that I would like to mention before we actually set up the Gradle test suite here is that there are a few rules that you need to follow for the tag names, this string. You know, there are some reserved characters that you should not use here, like commas, left parentheses, right parentheses, ampersand, vertical bar, and exclamation point. The vertical bar is basically the pipe. So basically you're restricted to printable characters with the exception of the ones I mentioned. You cannot use control characters and you cannot have white spaces here. Okay, so let's go back to our Gradle build here and see how we can specify test suites. So the first thing we're going to do is define the equivalent of my test suite here. So recall that my test suite is basically including these 4 tests. So the way to do it in JUnit 5 with Gradle support is to use the include tags method. And basically what we do is we just basically create a list here of all of our tags that we define. So because we're including feature 1 tests and feature 2 tests, there are 2 ways. One is we can just include the feature tests, which notice that we tag both the feature 2 test and the feature 1 test, or we can include individually. Let's actually do both ways. So the first one is, like I said, we're going to do feature 1 test followed by feature 2 test. Then we're going to include the integration test, which I've got here, and lastly performance test. So this is the equivalent of let me just expand this a little bit here. So this would be the equivalent way of defining this my test suite in JUnit 5. This is how you define it. Okay, so now that we define this, let's move on to the next one. So the next is my super suite, and as you can see, this is basically just my test suite with one additional test class, regression tests. So obviously, let me just add here some comment here, equivalent to JUnit 4 and equivalent to my super suite. My super test suite, I should say, is basically just adding the regression test. Just comment that because we're going to run this guy here, and let's keep going defining all of my test suites. So the next one, recall, is the one that we are defining all of the feature tests, excluding the flaky tests. So here there are two ways to define this. So first let me just put a comment here. So this is equivalent to this, and we can define it with include tags. And here we're going to use a Boolean expression. So the include tags supports here a Boolean expression of tags, as well as parentheses if to change the precedence order. So you can do, I'm going to define the feature test, and I'm going to exclude the flaky tests tag. Not. So the operators that are supported are the not, which is the exclamation point or bang, the and, which is a single and %, and the pipe, which is an or. And also you can use the open and close parentheses for to change the precedence, which is left to right. So we can define the include tags like that for the all feature tests without flaky tests. Another way we can define it is by using the exclude tags. So I can say include tags, and there is another method here called exclude tags, and I basically can say include the feature test tags and exclude the flaky tests. Okay, so this would be equivalent to this way, but I prefer this way because it's just more compact. Okay, so moving on, let's define the next filter. So we have all but flaky test suites. So this is essentially all of the tests that we had defined up here. So we're going to include all of these tests, and we're going to exclude flaky tests. Sorry, actually this is all but flaky tests. So what else we have here? And then we have the flaky test suite, very similar to these guys. So let's copy that. Let's remove this, and basically we want the feature tests and the flaky tests. So this is basically what we want. Okay, so that's basically how in JUnit 5, using a Gradle project, you would filter use the tag mechanism to organize and group tests, and then the Boolean operators here, along with include and exclude tags in Gradle to do the equivalent of the categories and include and exclude categories in JUnit 4. Okay, so now that we have all of our Gradle configuration here, let's just get rid of all of these JUnit 4 test suites and categories so that we have a clean build, and let's test each of these suites in turn. So let's clean the project here. Okay, so let's take a look at this thing here. So notice that feature 1, all of the 3 tests of feature 1 test, all of the 3 tests of feature 2 test, and all of the 3 tests of integration test, and all of the 3 tests of performance test have, we got the runs for all of them. So this was equivalent to my test suite. So let's comment this out and let's uncomment these. And this is basically, modeling or mimicking the my super test suite, which is basically the my test suite with regression tests. So let's run this. Okay, so we see that all of the tests ran, and we got our next extra run here, which is the regression test. One thing I need to mention here is that it's not possible to control, unlike on a JUnit 4 test suite, the order of the tests. So for example, if I change, let's say I want my performance test and regression tests to run before my feature tests, for instance, just sake of example here. So notice that the tests are still running in this order, which seems to be, just alphabetical order. So there is no way to, as far as I know, to actually change the order of the that you could do in a suite. So moving on here, the next one was where I'm running all of my feature tests, excluding the flaky tests. Okay. So let's run this and see what we get. So notice that the feature 1, all of the tests in feature 1 have been excluded because this entire class is being tagged with flaky tests. Feature 2 test, we've got only the class itself, it's not tagged with flaky test, but one of the tests is tagged with a flaky test, test3. So of these two tests, only the tests from feature 2 test 1 and 2 should be included. Okay, moving on, let's define the suite or category equivalent to all but flaky test suite. So let's run this and see what we get. Okay, so the first thing you notice that all of the tests in feature 1 have been excluded because this entire class is tagged with the flaky test, so they don't appear here. And feature 2 tests, only the 1 and 2 is included because test 3 here of the feature 2 test is tagged as a flaky test. And if you look at the rest of the 3 classes, you see the 3 tests here, 3 tests here, and 3 tests and 1 test here, because all of this integration test is not tagged anywhere with flaky test. Performance test also, it's not tagged with the flaky test. And regression test, if I show you here, has only 1 test. That is not tagged with flaky test, hence it's included. Okay, so continue. Lastly, I think this is the last guy here. This is where I had a in JUnit 4 a flaky test suite that included only flaky tests. So if I run this guy, I should be able to see all of the tests in feature 1 test because it's tagged with flaky test. Okay, so all of the 3 tests and a single test in the feature 2 test, which is this guy here. Okay, so this concludes this lesson. I hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching.